So I'm extremely pleased this afternoon to welcome Davina Robson, who has come all the way to see us from New South Wales in Australia.
Yes,
Long way. And gosh, are her arms tired.
Love it.
Yes. So just to tell you a little bit about Davina. Davina proudly works as a school teacher. She's also got a Bachelor of Psychology, and she's currently completing her PhD in psychology. So Davina has a keen interest in research. She's published a government report, conference papers, and 13 journal articles. That is very impressive.
I'm busy.
She's very busy. So her research focuses on psychological and educational factors in health and well-being across the lifespan. In particular, Davina has a keen interest in understanding the factors that contribute to flourishing in childhood and adolescence. And so in this seminar, we are about to hear all about her PhD topic, which is test anxiety in primary school children. Do take it away.
Thank you, Astrid, and hello, everyone online. So I'm Davina Robson. I'm sorry, they've got the thing on the screen.
Oh, okay, hang on. Let me get rid of that.
Just wait a sec.
Tech support, hang on. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, excellent.
Off you go. If you need to, can you see how you can just sort of move it if you need to, like that, but you have to watch that screen, not that one.
Oh, yeah. We'll just get it. Thank you so much. Yeah, so we're ready to go. So my name's Davina Robson. I'm a very proud school teacher. I also have a bachelor degree in psychology, and I am nearly, hopefully, finishing my PhD off next year. So I was really interested in neuroscience in education. So I'm trying to incorporate that in my PhD. So I'm very lucky to have some amazing supervisors. So I've got Professor Stuart Johnston as one of my supervisors. I've got Associate Professor Stephen Howard. And when I went to them and said, oh, I really would like to do test anxiety in primary school children, they said to me, well, we're not experts in test anxiety. If you really want to do it, you have to get somebody else who's an expert in test anxiety. So I went to what I thought definitely is the best person in the world in test anxiety, which of course he's from the UK, Professor David Putwan. So he agreed to be on my PhD as well. So I'm very, very lucky to have a blend of someone from education, someone who's an expert at physiological measures, and an expert in test anxiety. So I've got a great brains trust. Okay, so thanks again for having me. And when I read your mission statement, it just spoke to me because it's something that I'm very interested in, like as an educator, also interested in neuroscience and psychology, and trying to bring all those different disciplines together to actually answer questions to help children, you know, which as a teacher and as a researcher, you want to make your research more practical. And the ultimate goal is to help our children. So when I saw your mission statement, I thought, I'm going to steal that. I love that mission statement. So I'm very, very pleased to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me as well. Okay, so I'm just going to go through what test anxiety is at first, and then I'm going to talk about my studies and what led me to looking at physiological arousal in test anxiety. So you sort of get a story about how I've sort of weaved things and created a story or a narrative to end up looking at, you know, brain, electrical activity of the brain, and also skin conductance. So I just sort of wanted to give you an overall picture of my research. And then question time. So test anxiety, we're really looking at this. I love this Yerkes-Donaldson law, and it's like quite old, from the 1908. And you're really looking at your optimal arousal. So for tests, you want to be a little bit stressed. Like everyone needs to be a little bit stressed. It motivates us, and it really turns our brain on. You know, you don't want to be on the other side where, you know, you're low arousal, that sort of fatigue and sleepiness. but also you don't want to be on the other end, and that's high arousal. So that's really looking at test anxiety on that other end, where it doesn't lend itself well to performance. Now, test anxiety has been in the literature for over 70 years. So it's really a blend of education and psychology. And as we know, like, it has important life outcomes, because if you are stressed during testing, like if you are worried, you're not going to basically get your best result. And therefore, that might stop you from getting into courses you want to get into. Also, high school settings you might want to be in. So it really does. Education is, as we all know, is important for life outcomes. So that's why I feel test anxiety is important. So the definition in the literature is when someone becomes anxious and distressed when taking an exam, and that's experiencing test anxiety. So it's like a performance anxiety. So we sort of position test anxiety as a stable situation-specific personality trait, where individuals react with state anxiety to evaluative situations. So that's the more formal definition, and it's reported worldwide at about 10 to 40%. So as a measurement of test anxiety, you've really got three components. Like at first it was unidimensional, and now it's multidimensional. So you're really looking at your thoughts and your worries. So rumination, concern, mental disorganization. You're also looking at your emotionality or your affective physiological. So your nervousness, your sweaty palms, and your heart rate. And that really lends itself to measuring those kind of things with physiological measures and neuroscience. So that's, you know, an important component. And also you've got your behavioral component where you're avoidant, you have poor study skills, and you withdraw. So it's really a multi-dimensional concept. Now, there's a lot of theories in test anxiety, and they've developed over time. At the moment, there's no one big theory everybody's using. We sort of use a blend of all theories, which is really interesting. So that just gives you an idea. Okay, so my first study, I did a systematic review, which is published in the Journal of School Psychology. And what I really wanted to do is, before I started my PhD, is to really look at what's happened over the last 20 years in test anxiety. So I really wanted to look at experimental research, observational research, and also interventions, what's been happening with interventions. And I had 76 studies overall. That's my Prisma flow diagram. So it was really interesting because we've got samples from all over the world. So we've got European samples, Asian and North American samples, but I've highlighted Oceania. So that's Australia, where I'm from, and New Zealand. So we only had one study there and one study in Africa. So it has not, test anxiety has not been tested in Australian school populations. 64% of the studies were in more developed regions, and 36 were conducted in less developed regions, which is really interesting because we want to get like an idea of how this is for all people. Okay, so as I said, we looked at three things. And this is the biggest finding in the literature, and it was the first finding in the literature, is that test anxiety has a negative association with performance. And this has also been tested longitudinally, so we know that, and discounting for IQ as well. So we know that it affects your mathematics performance, your literacy, and your general school achievement, which really makes sense. We also found that it has a negative association with your self-concept, so your confidence. And also it's related to maths anxiety, but it's a different concept. Also, it has a positive association with general anxiety. So people with high anxiety often have a high test anxiety. We don't know the causal link here, but there is an association. Social anxiety, it's 0.57, and we know there's a link with depression also. Also a negative association with self-esteem, self-efficacy, and self-regulation. So I looked at, in my next study, a different measure of those things. So the more confident you are in your academic abilities, the lower your the lower your test anxiety is. And also, this is really interesting, that girls seem to have higher test anxiety than boys. And it had been found in the older population, but not really in the younger population until we combined all these studies. So we can see that girls have higher test anxiety than boys. So that was an interesting finding. Also, I did a moderation with world regions, and it seems like samples from Asia, the Asian region, have higher test anxiety than Europe and North America. So that's also a very interesting finding overall. And that's happening in primary school. So this is the younger children. So it starts quite early in these populations. Okay, so then there's experimental, which I won't go through today, but obviously what reduces test anxiety is having personal mastery goals and also fear appeals. This is when the teacher does not sort of scare children about testing and put pressure on them. So if you have lower fear appeals from your teacher about testing, you have reduced test anxiety. And also tests using lower cognitive load, game-based testing, adaptive tests, that's where it goes to your level, and lower state testing all have lower test anxiety. Now, that's nothing like the tests we sit today, which are not game-based, which are paper-based, high cognitive load, fixed tests, and high state testing. And that's where our test anxiety often increases. Also, I thought what was interesting is what interventions have worked in younger populations. So it looks like things like guided relaxation, breathing exercises, yoga, and I'll come back to these later on, help reduce test anxiety, but also CBT. So you're really working on that, you know how it's a multi-dimensional, you're really working on that cognitive part of test anxiety. So that's behavior, patterns, and emotions. And also with the CBT, it seemed to have longer term effects as well, positive on test anxiety. So over time. Less successful interventions, which is very interesting, is physical activity, because most people think, oh, let's just get the kids running outside. That will decrease their stress, but that doesn't work for primary school children. And, you know, we know exercise does reduce stress and anxiety. So maybe because children are so physically active anyway, it just negates that effect. And more successful for boys than girls. Girls probably liked more structural colouring. This is before a test. So this is a very easy intervention to do for primary school teachers, is before a test, do free colouring. Boys prefer that. And structured for girls, or they can choose. That's like a nice, easy thing to do. And that probably reduces their stress. And it's like mindful breathing activity, really. Yep, and breathing, structured breathing interventions were more successful for boys than girls. Okay, so research gaps is the lack of studies in Australia. Also, there seems to be the lack of physiological measures. It's all self-report. And we need to look at more demographic differences and predictors of test anxiety. So for my study too, this was post-COVID. So this was a very, very hard time to recruit, and all teachers were stressed. And in Australia, we closed our schools. So it's a hard time to do a PhD. So, you know, my numbers aren't great, but I'm so happy and, you know, pleased that the schools let me be part of their lives and let me research there. So I had 5 schools. And just as out of interest, I'll just go through. These are the variables I looked at. So I'm really looking at your academic confidence to see if that's a protective factor for test anxiety. Looking at psychological health, anxiety and depression, which we got from the meta-analysis. Also, I added things like well-being and belonging, school well-being and belonging, because we really wanted to see if the school climate could make a difference, because that could be one area of intervention, is looking at school climate. I looked at personality. A lot of personality hadn't been done in the younger age children, and also looked at self-regulation. So thank goodness, but terrible also, is that we did find that children in Australia have test anxiety. So that's something, because our culture in Australia, you know, we've got this saying, she'll be right, mate, which is like, everything will be fine. We're a very sort of relaxed culture, and we don't put a lot of pressure on testing. So I thought, am I going to find test anxiety as a thing in Australia? We're very similar to England and the US, so I thought most likely, but you just never know due to culture. So yeah, so when we looked at it, we thought about 15% probably had high test anxiety, and 32% probably had low test anxiety. So we've got that classic bell curve there as well. Okay, and we also found that very similar figures of girls in Australia are more stressed about testing than boys as well. So we found a similar finding. Just a little, this is just one of the statistical things I've done. I'm doing a structural equation model for those who are into those. And you do your correlations and things like this, but this is just a model. And you can see that things like academic buoyancy, school well-being, school belonging do make a difference in this model. A big thing is also emotional stability. So that's part of the personality. So that's opposite to neuroticism. So, you know, that those people that constantly worry about things. So emotional stability was a protective factor. As I said, school well-being and belonging a protective factor, and academic buoyancy also. So that's how confident you feel in your academic ability. Of course, anxiety and depression didn't come up as much. And also if you're worried about COVID as well. So I sort of did a COVID measure. You're more likely to be worried about test anxiety as well. Okay, so this is what we're all interested in here, is the neuroscience aspect. So this is a systematic review about physiological arousal in test anxiety. So it is an area that has used neuroscience in education in this field. So basically this study was saying that, you know, of course, self-report is based on social desirability and subjective beliefs and your awareness. And physiological measures, I guess, as we all know, they're more objective. And you can do a continuous assessment over time of physiological measures as well, and especially during a test. So I collected physiological measures during a test, which is hard to do with self-report. And also it's they're hard to repress and control, you know, physiological measures. They're also saying that most research is done on undergraduate students. You know, they're easy to do. And there's need for more classroom-based research. And there was little using skin conductance and brain electrical activity. So a lot of people were looking at heart rate measures. So there was a little done in the area I looked at. Okay, so just to explain what skin conductance is, so the kids get to put 2 little finger cuffs on their non-dominant hand, and it's really looking at your sympathetic system, so your ANS. So it's sweat gland activity. So it's actually measured. So it's like a little electrode, and you put gel, and it sort of measures like the sweat in your skin. I would like to tell kids it's a lie detector test, but ethically I can't. Maybe on my own children. And it's a tonic, so it's over time, and it's often found a positive correlation with anxiety. So the more anxious you are, the more you sweat, and the high levels of skin conductance you have. Also, I used what's called like EEG, so electrical brain activity. So that measures like in the cerebral cortex. So it's only sort of depth of 5 millimeter in the brain. And I used this dry single electrode. So for my honours, before my PhD, I did a full cap. So full caps give you more information, but by the time you put them on, if you've ever done EEG, it's like half an hour. And I can't do that to young children. So you lose a bit of data having only one electrode, but you also can take it into schools, so it's portable. So I did all my testing in schools. So it's looking at the pyramidal cells, and looking at the electrical activity of the postsynaptic potentials. So as you can see, you can just wear it on your head. The kids loved it. I think they thought they looked like gamers. So they were fine with it. And it does your frontal. So a lot of things related to testing is your frontal cortex, like your executive functioning. So I was quite happy, even though it wasn't a full cap. I was quite comfortable, with the ecological validity in schools to have just one cell. But of course, you lose other information. Okay, so basically I wanted to look at physiological variables through a time series experiment, comparing high and low test anxiety students in a mock exam. So ethically, we can't do it in real exams. We can't take it, into a real exam. So I took a real exam, which is called a NAPLAN exam. So I took an example of that exam and gave it to the children. So from my survey data, I had 189 people, and then I invited them back to do the second part of the study, and we got 75 people, and I was really happy with that. 2 schools out of the 5 schools, 2 schools came on board, because we're withdrawing people from class. So it's really, I really appreciate the parents that consented, the children who consented, and, and the teachers, so I'm very, very appreciative of that. So this is the experimental design. So before we started the test, we did eyes open and eyes closed. So that's a measure of arousal for EEG. So we did that. So it was 1 minute eyes open, 1 minute eyes closed. And then I did executive functioning measures on the iPad. So we looked at all 3 different executive functioning measures. We used the Toolbox measures there. And then I asked them a state and trait anxiety inventory. So the state one is about how you feel before the test. So they knew they were going to have a mass test, which is a NAPLAN test, which they usually have, which is an Australian-wide test. So we asked them how they felt before, and then we asked them how they felt after. And then after the experiment, we did eyes open, eyes closed. So we had sort of a baseline and after. So we had a pre and post test to measure both EEG and skin conductance. And then we also took it during the NAPLAN test and averaged the figures out. Also, I wanted to say I did get ethics for this from the university. And because it was happening in Department of Education schools in New South Wales, I also had to get approval of their board as well. And there's a picture of basically how it looks. So they've got the EEG headset on, they've got, you know, the skin conductance, and they're doing an online test. And this sort of reduces a bit of movement because you only want brain activity. You do not want movement, which comes up on the EEG. So basically, you know, you try and keep them as still as possible, but they're children. So that's how it is. Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to group the sample in high and low to compare the difference. So I did a median split, which it looked really nice. It was like perfect to do. And I did, just to make sure there was a difference between high and low, I did an independent t-test. And as you can see, you've got the two scores are quite different. So the high had a mean around 85 and the low had a mean around 57. And this is a test anxiety scale we gave the children. So that's what they scored on a survey, a test anxiety survey. Okay, so what we found is with their test scores, the high test anxiety group did score lower than the low test anxiety group. So it looked like, which as I was saying is a major finding in the literature, it did look like they do score lower than, which is quite interesting. So, of course, the test scores were not normally distributed. So I was happy that for me to think that, yes, they were nervous during the test. To show that there was a difference in test scores, to me, with the experimental design, I thought, well, they took the test seriously. Yeah, so I was happy but not happy, if that makes sense. Yeah. Also, I just sort of looked at t-tests. So it looks like trait anxiety. There's a difference between high and low. Test anxious children with trait anxiety. So I used that as a covariate in my study. And I also used executive functioning. I did a composite. That wasn't significant. It was 0.06, but it was close to significant. So I also used that as a covariate for those people who are into statistics in my ANOVA. Yeah. Okay, so my first finding. Now, this is a finding I did not expect to see. So because this has come very, very quickly, I've just analysed the data. So at least you're getting it fresh, but it also means that I've put my SPS diagram up there. So it's not fancy. And as a primary school teacher, it hurts not to have like fancy diagrams, but it's last minute and I'm happy to share it fresh off the press with you. So 2 is the high anxiety group. So this is the skin conductance level. So I just wanted to know if there was a difference, but in my mind, I'm thinking, yes, students with high test anxiety should have higher skin conductance levels, and we found the opposite. So there was a main group effect, and which I'm going to talk about why I think that has happened. So at first I was thinking, wow, so you've got the brain activity and then you've got the body saying something different. So children with high test anxiety, as we can see there, do have lower skin conductance. Okay, we also looked at arousal. So that's EEG alpha in the eyes closed condition. So as you can see from the experiment, we did that first. So we did the test wasn't even being done, just sitting there before everything, eyes closed for a minute, and took this. And I found that, as you can see in the green, the high anxious kids before the test, so that's 1, had quite high arousal. So alpha is supposed to be when you close your eyes, you're relaxed, it's supposed to be high. So that's normal. So already, before even their testing, their brain's working. That's how I'm seeing it. So they're highly aroused before a test, which probably makes sense. And then after a test, it goes down. Whereas kids with low test anxiety, they're quite relaxed before the test. And after the test, you can see that during the test, their brain's working. So they have arousal during the test. So they're really peaking at the right sort of moment. So I thought that was really interesting that there were sort of differences with the two groups, which I'll explain what I think about that. Also, what I wanted to do is just look at all the different frequency bands in the EEG. So a lot of these were non-significant when I did the ANOVA. So I did a mixed method ANOVA. So this is delta. So as you can see, in all these, low test anxiety children seem to always have lower but not significant figures, and this could be because my numbers were quite low with the patterning. But when the delta's high, it's sort of associated with cortical plasticity, relaxed, and if it's too low, it's really seen in children with ADHD and learning difficulties. So you can see that during the test, which is number 2, so that's pre, during test and post, that high delta is good. It's a good thing to have. And you can see with low test anxiety, they seem to have like relaxed, then they're sort of, using their brain. And then this is an interesting finding, which I'll talk about after, that a lot of the children don't return to baseline within their brain. So their cortical activity doesn't return to baseline. So that's about 5 minutes after the test. So that, for me, I'm thinking interventions, but I'll talk about that later. So they're not returning to baseline very quickly after testing. Okay, so we looked at theta also. So high theta, you have little anxiety, but you're attentive. As you can see, there seems to be a difference, but it's not statistically significant between high and low test anxious children, okay, which I kind of expected to find. And as you can see, they're not returning to baseline, which is number 3 as well. Now, there was a linear contrast that was significant because I wanted to look at over time. So you can sort of see that, theta was lower post-testing, but did not differ during testing. So you can see that there was a difference between pre and post-testing with theta. So as I said, they're not returning to baseline, all children, quickly. Also, we looked at alpha. There was no statistical results here. But as you can see, the lower test anxiety children in the green are starting off, ready. Their brains are on high alert. They're already worried. That's, to me, they're set, they're ready to go very, very early on. And then during the test, and then they're both high after the test. And then we looked at beta. So high beta is complex thought, excitement, arousal. And you can see in the test that low anxiety children generally have, more complex thought or higher arousal during testing. And there it seemed to return to baseline. So that's sort of like basically what I looked at. And I'm sort of writing up my discussion and looking at my results at the moment. Now, from what I could tell is there's no underlying EEG differences during and after testing when you look at all the bands. So, statistically, I might have not had enough power. You can see there is some sort of difference between the two groups. And it seems to be, if anything, either they have high arousal at the beginning of testing and not enough during testing, which is one of the theories I'll talk about in a minute. But what really got me, and which I didn't sort of understand, is why they had low skin conductance, because I was sure they would feel more anxiety in their body. So I was thinking, okay, there's a difference between the two systems, what they self-report, what they feel in their body, and what's actually happening in their brains, because we know that, with the eyes closed condition, that, there is a difference. High test anxiety children are highly aroused. They're ready to go. They're worried. But what I found with some interesting studies that during ADHD, they have they're synonymous with lower skin conductance and reduced alpha. And that's what that group was showing: reduced skin conductance and reduced alpha. So I think there might be something in that neurologically. I haven't sort of fully developed it and worked it out, but maybe they're sort of mimicking that their brain isn't, concentrating. They're hyper aroused about everything, and they're not sort of focused on the exam. So maybe that's really what is happening. It's more of an effect of high test anxiety, more similar to mimicking that ADHD sort of lack of concentration, which may, help us understand why they're getting lower results, even if they have the same IQ levels. And as I said, I co-varied it with executive functioning, which is an IQ, but we sort of did that. So we ruled out that also. So that might be one explanation of the results. And another theory is the attentional control theory. So that's related to, like, during a test that you're so anxious and worried, there's competition for attentional resources. So you're sort of like thinking about everything else, but you can't seem to focus. So you have impaired attentional control. You're easily distracted, and therefore that sort of is why you may perform worse. So that's a theory that sort of lays onto what our findings quite nicely, that your cognitive resources are being stretched, basically, because you are too worried about the exam. So that's where I'm at. I'm very, very open to other ideas. As I said, it's all very fresh, but you're getting it firsthand, which is a great thing. So the limitations for the research is, of course, that one, as I explained, the one electrode versus the full cap, and that ecological validity, because I did it in schools. So that was great. I only had one study. So, of course, I can't generalize to every population, but, and I had low sample size and low power. But it's a PhD and it was only me going out to schools collecting the data. So, I don't have a lab and I don't have a big team. Maybe one day. And I lost some data with technological problems, which is another thing about using so many different things at one time. That's a problem as well. And also, I feel like this is a bit of a pilot to sort of use physiological measures in schools. Like, how effective is it to take your laptop and bits and pieces and go into a school and measure these things? I feel like it was quite successful, like as a school teacher and as a researcher. Like, it's one-to-one research, so it's not, it takes a lot of time to set up. Each child was about 45 minutes. So it is time consuming, but you get good one-on-one data. And I was overwhelmed about how into this the kids were. Like, when I showed them their electrical brain activity, they're like, wow, they were so excited, and they really loved the idea of science. I feel like it was a positive experience for everybody. And, you know, of course, it was a teaching moment as a teacher about how, you know, you can measure things before, during, and after and compare them. And it really gave them firsthand experience about how a scientific experiment works. And, you know, it gave them real life understanding of that. So I really thank the kids, and they were so enthusiastic about it. So as a teacher, also I'm starting to think about interventions. What does this really mean? It obviously means that, like, I think that breathing is excellent and that has worked. I also think a CBT should be part of it as well, because obviously it's a worry. It's something and it actually is affecting their brains. So it's a thought they have about testing that actually affects their scores. So CBT, and my supervisor, Professor Putwain, has a STEPS program in high school, not in primary school yet, but he does CBT, study skills, and relaxation. So I'm thinking maybe like something that uses a lot of things are great. And I think young children in primary are probably open to that. Reflecting on their thoughts. So probably be the older grades, year 5 and 6. And also what I saw with interventions, you know, they do a lot of breathing before, but as we saw, like, your brain doesn't shut off after the test. It doesn't come back to baseline 5 minutes after. And I know as a university student, like, after, they're so cruel, university exams. But you just remember that after you came out and you talked to people and you're like, oh my God, I got that wrong. I got this wrong. Why did I do that? And so you're more anxious after. But these are primary school students who are just like, they finished the test and like, you know, thanks for coming. You're finished. And they're still like eyes open, eyes closed, are a bit worried. So I'm thinking maybe even after stressful exams, you can do the meditation or the relaxation activities after. There's sort of no harm in that. And also debriefing students, especially those who are worried. So you can still use things as teachers during, you know, before test and even after testing. So that's something that I took out of the results. And I'm really happy that we are seeing there are differences, and we can measure test anxiety physiologically. Going into this, you're never quite sure whether it's going to work or you're going to find anything. And I'm quite confident that what we see are some differences. Some aren't, as we said, statistically significant, but there seems to be, it is a physical thing. It's just not something mental, it's a physical thing. And this is where neuroscience is so powerful also, because you really look at test anxiety from many different aspects and try and bring it together. So hopefully you know, your mission to bring everything together and to improve the lives of students, hopefully on some small level, I've done that. Just say I have, even if I haven't, because PhDs are hell. Don't tell my supervisors. I said, yeah. So anyway, so that's sort of you know, my research. So thank you for listening. And this is like, if you wanted to follow my research, I'm on Google Scholar and Twitter, which is old now. My kids tell me how old I am having Twitter. Anyway, yeah, so that's really my research. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Incredible, Davina. Yeah, the website formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah, formerly known as Twitter. Yeah, so if you have any questions, try not to hammer my research. I'm very vulnerable.
Don't worry, everybody's very kind. We have got a few lovely questions in the chat that I will, as usual, take my chair privilege and ask you a question to begin with. I have got a few I can ask, but my kind of research areas, you know, is very applied, and it's all to do with working in schools and getting that kind of ecologically valid data. So my first question is, you know, how was it doing this in schools? Were the schools kind of receptive to you doing this kind of experiment in situ, and kind of how did you go about like approaching schools and making that kind of relationship with them?
Yeah, and that is a thing. Teachers are stressed. Schools are very, very busy places, so they don't really want to do your research. So I tried to make the research applicable to them. So I gave them a report after. So one of my bigger schools, they had a class with kids that were gifted. High performance kids. So they thought their children were very, very anxious during testing. So they actually wanted the feedback to help policy. So I think if you're going to go into schools, you have to give them something that they can use to further their policy and help children. And being a school teacher as well, it's not just about your research and your baby and your ideas. It's about something that will develop the school and they can use in policy. Also, I think being a school teacher and a current school teacher, it helped because you have to negotiate around their timetable and you have to speak teacher. And also because I was a trained teacher, I could work with the kids by myself. So I didn't have to have another teacher in the room and therefore use up some of their assets. So it was really good in that way as well. But just always being respectful, building good relationships with the school. And I said, feeding back so they can get value out of your data. So that's pretty much how I did it, and endless appreciation for the schools.
That's incredible. I love that speak teacher. That is a big problem, I think, for a lot of researchers, big challenge. No, well done.
Yeah, you have to sort of put it into their words, and they don't want you to take more time and resources. They want you to come in, do your research and go and not create problems.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. I will come to the questions in the chat because we have quite a few. You can probably see up there.
Yes.
The chat is popping like popcorn. So the first question from Suzanne is, have you considered the role of interest in the physiological responses?
Yes, that is a good one. Interest is can probably be measured by arousal, and I know another study did do that. Their measures were from the control theory about emotional measures, and they looked at those as well as physiological measures. So that is a good one. See, my measures, I didn't take those measures, but you can definitely pair the two, which I hadn't done. But yeah, researchers are doing that, and the excitement and motivation and trying to pair those two up. Definitely, it can be done.
Really interesting. Ironic, interesting. Question of interest. So Michael has got a question. Michael asks, teachers are familiar with the problem of teaching to a classroom, including students with different levels of knowledge and different levels of ability. Does your research suggest some ways to teach students with different levels of anxiety?
Yeah, that's a great one. Well, we know that we can't scare children, those fear appeals, definitely. But I think we got to look at protective factors. When I think about how school well-being, how you feel like you belong to the school is a protective factor. So it's the culture of the school. I think just having a good culture of the school can speak to all children and their mental health, not just like their testing situations or their learning as well. I think just having a warm, you can make mistakes culture, feeling you're a part of it makes a big difference. I thought it was very interesting that academic confidence plays a big role as well. So I think, making children feel like they're doing their best and that they're doing right things, I think for every child, and especially I think those children that I guess are not low achievers, just celebrating their little things they do. Because actually I work in learning support as well, like that's one of my roles, and it's just like celebrating those small achievements and making them feel confident. They're not going to be the same as everybody else, but that goes a long way, and in research we can see that goes a long way. And also we've got to talk to the kids that are anxious, because that isn't a protective, those more neurotic kids with neuroticism that don't have that emotional stability. We're seeing that affects test anxiety, but that affects the classroom as well. So for kids that are constant worriers, I always have a classroom that, it's a safe classroom, but they know what's coming up. And that's kids with ADHD, ASD, autism spectrum disorder, just to they know what's coming up. So you have your timetable there. If there's something in a routine that's a little bit off, they know that's going to be okay. So for those worried kids, okay, we're going to have a test. Don't make such a big deal about it, and it's coming up on this day. But after, let's do this fun activity or something like that, because we know they're still stressed after the test. So it's sort of like making a classroom predictable, warm, giving them confidence, and just having a good school culture, I think, helps all children. I think I over-answered that question, Michael, but never ask a teacher a question because
never ask a teacher a question.
So we'll go forever.
Love it. You have got a few lovely comments here, which before I forget, I'll read them to you. So Kay has left you a couple of lovely comments. She says this is a fantastic empirical contribution to the social emotional learning canon of inquiry. Thank you. And I think she's referring to your PhD. She says you've done it.
Thank you.
Thank
you. It means a lot.
Samuel says this was great research.
Thank you.
So that's lovely. So back to the questions. So Paul has asked, I don't know if this is quite in your specialty. So, if you can't answer it, you can't answer it. But he says at the beginning of your talk, you mentioned that test anxiety was high in Asia. Is test anxiety equally high in Asian students in the UK?
That is a good question. Yeah. So that is something, like one of my schools, I gave feedback to. They actually thought, like in Asia, it's definitely they have high test anxiety, and that's both boys and girls. But when I did my research in an Australian school, so I can't speak for a UK school, but we're very, very similar. They thought the students there, they were in the gifted class, the Asian student population had higher stress. And they wanted to help those students because they had a lot of, they were going after school to tutoring. So they have there's a culture there of, all day school, night tutoring, all day school, night tutoring. But what I found, and this is where the power of data comes in, is that those students had actually lower test anxiety than the Australian students. And maybe it's because they have that protective factor of academic confidence, because they are doing the tutoring, and there's a lot of pressure on them, but they're confident. Yeah. And also they felt like they belonged to the school. So they had high belongingness to the school. Yeah. So I think they had a lot of protective factors and good emotional stability. And so they weren't worried. So yeah, you do sometimes think that a certain population, because they're pressured, they may have high test anxiety. But in that one school, it was more the Australian students who weren't probably doing extra, So yeah, that is a really good question, and it's something that in my very, very small sample in one school that I didn't sort of find. So I think you've got to just get your data, collect your data, and look at your students and try and answer it in a scientific manner.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah,
well done. So it's nearly 5. I can stay another few minutes.
I'm fine.
I've got to head off quite soon.
No worries.
But I'll stay an extra few minutes because there are a couple of other interesting questions here. And sorry in advance if we don't get to everyone, but you do have Davina's contact details.
Yeah, please email me.
Email her with any questions.
Yeah,
absolutely. So we've got two kind of similar questions here. I don't know if I can possibly match them together. It's something to do with anxiety and sort of level of preparedness, or how easy they found the questions. So do you think that kind of there's a difficulty level implication? So, you know, if they find, oh, I don't know these answers, maybe they would be more anxious, more aroused during the test, whereas, oh, I'm getting this, you know, do you think that would cause more relaxedness?
Oh, definitely. So as we saw, like in experimental designs, if it's a fixed test, kids are more stressed. So I could get my numbers, a range of numbers. Like I had 10 maths questions, but I made sure that they reached harder levels. So I started off with basic and sort of higher. So definitely, I think it relates to that concept of worry. You know, when we talked about cognitive worry and things like that, it's like, I think that would definitely relate to, I'm stressed, I can't do this, and it gives them more anxiety, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
But in your study, I guess you didn't really have a control for that, no?
No, I didn't have a control. All I did was to see if
were they high or low?
High or low, and did high and low get higher or lower test marks? Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So Suzanne asks, she says that she's planning to measure galvanic skin response during spelling tests in her research. So you've got a fellow researcher. Would you recommend this, even though your skin conductance results were not what you expected?
Definitely. Please do, because I guess the more literature we have in this area, the more, you know, we can contribute to, you know, scientific research. So some studies have found, recent studies have found the same result as myself. So it's not unusual to find that result. And it will tell a story of some sort. Whatever you find will definitely tell a story. It's just matching it to the literature and to a theory. That's sort of the hard thing. Like, what does it mean? But always go for it. Yeah, definitely.
I think that's a lovely message. We have got a couple more outstanding questions, but I'm going to have to call it there.
That's all right. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Davina. I think that's a lovely message to finish on.
Yes. And Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas, everyone. This is our final,
your
final section of the term. And yes, thank you so much, everybody. We will see you again at the start of next term. And I hope you all have a lovely festive season and enjoy yourselves, friends, family. Have a break. All right. Thank you so much. And thank you so much again.
Of course.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Astrid. Thank you.